Charlie Chaplin is the silent film star we've known all our lives, especially for his most memorable character, the Tramp. And if you've ever watched his movies, you definitely knew him for his little mustache and funny outfits. He was witty, funny, and expressive, but it seems that there was more behind who he really was. Apparently, Charlie was living a scandalous life that many of his fans didn't know about, and his family is finally exposing his sick truth. So what did Charlie do that was so scandalous? And if he was still alive, would he have any fans left? Charlie Chaplin was born to be a star. With his father being an actor and vocalist, and his mother an actress and singer, talent clearly runs in the family. But his life wasn't always easy. His alcoholic father abandoned them, and his mother was too mentally ill to take care of anyone. This meant Charlie and his brother had to find a way to survive. One of Charlie's childhood friends, Effie Wisdom, recalled what Charlie's life was like back then. "My aunt used to feed him, because there was no social security in those days. No free milk, no children's allowances, nothing. You never starved, and yet you were on the breadline," she said. Charlie spent most of his childhood as a clog dancer, while he went in and out of charity homes. Poverty was a big part of his childhood, so he got his first acting job at the age of 14 to try to make a living. "I was hardly aware of a crisis because we lived in a continual crisis, and being a boy, I dismissed our troubles with gracious forgetfulness," Charlie said. Charlie first played the role of Jim in a real play, A Romance of Cockaigne, and then played William Gillette in a production of Sherlock Holmes right after. The latter got him plenty of recognition, and soon opportunities started flooding his way. "I was a news vendor, printer, toy maker, doctor's boy, etc. But during these occupational digressions, I never lost sight of my ultimate aim to become an actor," Chaplin remembered. "So between jobs, I would polish my shoes, brush my clothes, put on a clean collar, and make periodic calls at a theatrical agency." Charlie was mainly taking part in solo burlesque acts before he joined the famous comedy troupe that was run by Fred Carno. Charlie's brother Sidney managed to get Charlie a place in the troupe despite how suspicious Carno was of Charlie. Little did he know that Charlie Chaplin's talents shouldn't be doubted. Soon enough, he even secured his place as a lead performer. This went on for a while before Charlie decided it was finally time to start acting in films. It wasn't until his second movie that he got all the fame he deserved. The movie was Mabel's Strange Predicament, where the most iconic role of his life was born. The Tramp was a hilarious character with ill-fitting clothes, the baggy pants, and the small hat that are still iconic to this day. And we can't forget the mustache. "I wanted everything to be a contradiction. The pants baggy, the coat tight, the hat small, and the shoes large," Charlie said about his character. The Tramp was just the beginning of a lifelong career of filming and directing at the same time. Charlie left an agency behind, and he will always be remembered for his movies. Or maybe you won't watch his movies anymore after you find out about his creepy behavior. Maybe separating the art from the artist isn't that easy when it comes to Charlie. Even though Charlie successfully put his past away and managed his way through all his problems, some things remained in his subconscious. We talked about his unstable home when he grew up, but his deadbeat father wasn't the only problem with his childhood. Charlie grew up seeing an unstable marriage, seeing his parents love everyone but each other. After Charlie's mom, Hannah, met his father, she wasn't loyal to him. She was going from man to man and was never at home to love her own son. When his father left Hannah, that made things even harder. After all, how could Charlie ever know what true love was? This trauma from his childhood definitely changed the way Charlie treated and looked at women for the rest of his life. Charlie's friends and even his family members explained how the Tramp was the perfect role for Charlie. He was so invested in the character that at some point it took over Chaplin entirely, and they became one. The Tramp was the little boy who never grew up, and that was how Chaplin was too. He was stuck living in his childhood and never moved on. "It was just released whole from somewhere deep within my father. It was really my father's alter ego, the little boy who never grew up, ragged, cold, hungry, but still thumbing his nose at the world," Charlie's son, Charles Chaplin Jr., said. This character of the Tramp, who's so wrapped up in Chaplin's own psyche, who seems to channel his childhood and his neuroses and his humiliations of youth. It keeps replaying the traumas he experienced in London, James Spinney explained. But this doesn't excuse any of his behavior, and it doesn't excuse why he was obsessed with younger women. Being stuck in his childhood inside his head couldn't change the fact that he was still an adult in real life. Charlie always played the role of an awkward, sweet boy in his movies, but it turns out he was the opposite of that, and he didn't even hide it from the world. He had a hatred for women, so he spent his whole life treating them poorly. This is even reflected in his movies. Whenever a character he played liked a woman, he acted shy towards her. But if it was a woman who didn't fit his standards, Charlie instantly became vulgar and aggressive. Even when he was asked to describe his ideal woman, he said, "I'm not exactly in love with her, but she is entirely in love with me." Somehow, despite all of this, Charlie found a way to charm millions of women, And what's even more shocking is the fact that even though he didn't really like women, he claimed to have slept with over 2,000 of them. It just doesn't make sense. Charlie was a womanizer, and the only time he dealt with women was for his own pleasure. And this isn't even the sick part. Here's where it gets creepy. Most of the women he'd been with were underage. Charlie had a creepy obsession with young women, and it went beyond just friendship. Charlie dated many girls that weren't even 18, while he was twice their age. Charlie spoke of his love for younger girls and how there was something so pure in their slimness, in their slender arms and legs. He said he liked dewy 15-year-olds and waited until they were 16 before he married them. Then he'd get bored of them and go around chasing new and younger girls. So how surprising is it to find out that Charlie was the main inspiration behind the main character in Vladimir Nabokov's famous book Lolita? This is just a claim from biographers, but Charlie would be the perfect muse for Vladimir. He and Humbert would make great friends. Someone tweeted, "You're welcome to celebrate Charlie Chaplin's films and performances. Just know that off-screen, Chaplin was a pedophile who married the girls he abused to avoid prison time and an abusive husband. Charlie dated many women, but only a few stood out the most. So who were his real victims?" Charlie's first victim was Mildred Harris. She was only 16 when she said she was pregnant with Chaplin's child, and we're going to assume she was even younger when he first met her. Meanwhile, Charlie was already twice her age. He seduced her by being extremely romantic and love-bombing her. She was so young, so she didn't know any better and fell prey to his acts. Charlie would even send her roses at work. That doesn't sound like him, right? Well, he'd do anything to get a girl, and he succeeded. Soon they were lovers. The pregnancy alert forced Charlie to marry Harris so he could avoid a scandal. This turned out to be a pattern for the rest of his life. But this time it turned out it was a fake pregnancy alert the whole time. Now Chaplin was stuck in a marriage he didn't even want. Soon it became unbearable for him. He didn't even treat her as a wife. And when she got pregnant for real, it became even worse. Charlie was having affairs with different women while Mildred was having breakdowns and being hospitalized for them. He was short-tempered, impatient, and treated me like a cretin, Harris stated. He said he had to be free to live his own life and do as he pleased. After she gave birth and the baby died 3 days later, there was nothing keeping them together anymore. So they got a divorce, and Charlie went back to his old ways. This time, he set sights on an even younger woman. Lita Gray was only 6 when he first met her. It seems that Charlie waited until she was 12 when he hired her to portray an angel in his movie The Kid. He soon became obsessed with her. This time, he didn't even try to hide his relationship from the public and lied that Lita was 19 when he took her on dates. But this one ended up with an unwanted pregnancy too. This time Charlie tried to force her to get an abortion and then removed her from his movie when she refused to do so. After Lita's parents threatened to turn him over to the police, he was forced to marry Lita too. At least for him, marriage was a better option than prison. We can't say the same for Lita. She was only 16 when she married him. Lita described the relationship as revolting and inhumane. He was sick and made Lita do degrading things that she didn't want to do. She had basically become his slave in bed. The papers reveal she was forced to perform sexual acts that were illegal in California during the 1920s. Chaplin demanded she take part in a threesome with another woman. On one occasion, he screamed at her, "All married people do those kinds of things. You are my wife, and you have to do what I want you to do," the court divorce documents stated. At some point in the marriage, Charlie even motivated her to jump from a train. "We got married in Mexico because Charlie did not want to be talked about. On the way back, he was rather disgusting. We were standing out on the platform between cars while the train was traveling, and he said, 'We could just end this whole situation if you just jump,'" Lita described. After Lita gave birth to their second child, things became even worse. Charlie put cameras all over the place, and he kept a gun with which he patrolled the house at night. This time, Lita couldn't take it anymore, so she filed for divorce and won a $625,000 divorce settlement. But all the money in the world couldn't erase what she went through. He had another wife named Paulette Goddard, but this one was an unproblematic marriage, except that Charlie married her thinking she was 17, while she was 22 the whole time. Obviously, he divorced her because she wasn't young enough. Chaplin's final marriage was to Una O'Neill. This marriage obviously had an extreme age gap as well. Charlie was 53, and Una was on the bridge of turning 18. And the marriage wasn't incited by an unwanted pregnancy, so all in all, this seemed to be his happiest marriage. Her family was against this, and they even disowned Una. But she didn't care. We're guessing she never heard how he treated his previous wives, and that was the reason she was so excited to marry him. They had 8 children together and had an overall happy marriage. We don't know what changed this time, but O'Neill stuck around until Chaplin died. O'Neill seemed happy with her marriage to Charlie, but their kids didn't have such fond memories of him. His sons revealed how they were frightened by him because of how aggressive he was. It was also impossible to argue with him since he never admitted when he was wrong. Charlie's son Michael said that his dad would end up suffocating whoever got close to him. Imagine your own children being scared of you. Charlie's daughter Jane also talked about her father. She said that even though Chaplin was her dad and she grew up around him, she never really knew who the real Charlie Chaplin was. If his own family never really knew him, imagine how little all of us know about him. Whenever we watched any of Chaplin's movies, we never thought that there was such a sick truth behind him. Not only did he like young girls, he also treated all of them horribly. He was often described as sadistic, and they were right. Charlie did find love and settled down at last, but did he even deserve that after the pain he caused so many women? We just know that if he did those things today, he'd be rotting in prison his entire life. If you liked this video, make sure to watch this other one.